to find the potential connections between these two aspects. Therefore, the main research question for this thesis is, what is the relationship between the process of identity negotiation and the post-graduation settlement decision of Chinese students to settle in Canada, settle in China, or re-immigrate outside of China? Identity is how someone understands their relationship to the world. Scholars argue that identity is shaped by an individual's lived experience, and people always observe the social environment in order to conform and adapt to it. To define the participants' status of identity negotiation, there are 4 categories of acculturation. Assimilation describes people who choose the host culture over their own culture. Integration are those who remain both Chinese and Canadian cultures. People who maintain only Chinese culture will be categorized as separation, and marginalization are people who discard both cultures. Most studies that discussed the post-graduation settlement of international students focus on their cross-cultural experience in the host nation. Hence, my first question is to investigate the influences of acculturative experience on students' settlement decisions upon graduation, and to find the similarities and discrepancies with the existing literature. Some scholars have studied the influence of cosmopolitan education on international students' identities. So my last sub-question aims to find the impact of cosmopolitan education on their settlement plans. In order to answer those questions, I used the qualitative research method that conducted 17 semi-structured interviews so that I can gather real-life experience of my target. Compared to conducting a survey, this method provides much more in-depth and authentic data. However, because I used some quantitative research method to display the data within this qualitative research, I think this research follows a mixed research method rather than a pure philosophical one. My targets are Chinese international students who came to Canada after 2008 and who already graduated from a Canadian university. To locate this target, I used the snowball sampling method. Firstly, I published recruitment posters in both Chinese and English on all my social media platforms, especially on the Chinese platform WeChat. Then I asked all my friends and participants, even my parents, to share that poster. For the data analysis, I used the thematic analysis method. After I familiarized myself with the interview data, I highlighted the repeating content that I find important and relevant to the literature review. These contents were coded into categories and themes to lay out their interrelations. As of the result, among 17 participants, 10 out of them were integrated with both Chinese and Canadian cultures. 5 were separated from Canadian culture. 1 was marginalized from both cultures. Instead of a case of assimilation, my last participant was marked as a perpetual negotiation because she accepts the questions both cultures. Meanwhile, even though some participants had temporarily moved to another country, their long-term settlement decisions are still between China and Canada. 8 participants chose to settle in China and 6 are in Canada. Among those 6 participants, 1 of them initially moved back to China, but returned to Canada after working in her hometown for a couple of years. Then I also have 3 participants who don't belong to the groups above because they choose to stay in both Canada and China. During participants' cross-cultural experience, the most discussed aspects were the isolation and the difficulties in job hunting and immigration. Many participants feel isolated from the local students. One participant used hi-bye friends to describe her relationship with local students. Most participants prefer their Chinese friends over local friends. Furthermore, participants don't feel being involved in the local communities. For example, even as a permanent resident, you can't vote until you renounce your Chinese citizenship. So international students are not represented in the local community. Moreover, it's hard for international students to find a job in Canada for both stable income and for immigration. When participants are asked about their identity, almost all participants are still holding Chinese passports. Even one participant has a Canadian passport, she still doesn't feel like a Canadian. She claims that the differences are mainly because of the language and cultural factors. Along with the nationality, work and family are two important factors in their identity formation. Some argue that they need to find a job and contribute to the local community in order to be a Canadian. Additionally, one participant regards China as home because her families are still in China. As a result of cosmopolitan education, most participants admit that they have intercultural awareness and a sense of respect towards other cultures, which lead to an enhanced ability of critical thinking. Some participants also experience different levels of cultural shock as they go back to China. It often occurs when they try to readapt to the Chinese job market or to their family unit. Answering to the research questions, in related to the reasons for people's settlement decision, career is one of the most mentioned aspects. Generally, participants return to China for career opportunities and stay in Canada for better working conditions. Participants argue that there's more room for future development in China. Because of the development of the technology industry and urbanization in China, many participants chose to return home. In contrast, even a big city like Vancouver has a small market for participants who are not in tourism or education industries. One of the participants returned to Canada after working in China because she thinks Chinese companies value social skills over their ability at work. Also, her work infiltrated into her personal life in China, whereas in Canada, she finds a balance between work and life. As of the influence of cosmopolitan education, firstly, interculturality or participants' awareness and inclusiveness towards other cultures is not a major motivation. This is very different from the literature review. Secondly, most participants have enhanced mobility, which means they feel no longer belonging to a specific location. Some participants refused to be limited by the Chinese label and they want to explore the rest of the world. Some participants accept both Chinese and Canadian identities. Therefore, the mobility does encourage them to not simply go back to China. They would stay in Canada or they could travel between China and Canada. Then answering to my main research question, the relationship between identity negotiation and post-graduation settlement. Participants who have integrated with both Canadian and Chinese identities have equal chances to go back to China or stay in Canada. This depends on other factors such as work or on how much they value their Chinese or Canadian identities. Participants who are separated from Canadian culture are more likely to go back to China. However, there are several participants stayed in the Chinese community in Canada. For participants who are marginalized or still negotiating their identities, they both stayed in Canada because they feel their differences are more tolerated in Canada, but maybe not so much in China. Under the time and budget constraints, I believe the result can reveal the authentic lived experiences of international students that has not been discussed by other scholars. The trend displayed in the result could also signal future researchers to explore more in this area. In conclusion, the result of this research agrees with previous scholars that career is a major reason for post-graduation settlement plans. However, China is now known for more career opportunities, while Canada is known for better and more humane working conditions. Participants' decisions vary according to their priorities in the job market. If the Canadian government attempts to attract more Chinese students to stay in Canada, except for improving the immigration process, students need more career options in Canada. As well, they need to understand the local market. This includes not only knowledge and training in finding jobs in Canada, but also guidance in working with coworkers from other backgrounds. When they are more comfortable working in an English-speaking company, they are more likely to embrace their identity in Canada and stay in Canada. One of the limitations of this research is the potential bias in the sampling process. All participants are university graduates, while almost half of them are in the master's program. This could be caused by the snowball sampling method, since I used my social media to recruit the participants who consequently would be from an educational background similar to mine, which might affect the result. Because participants discussed a broad scale of topics during the interview, I would recommend future scholars to study on a more specific topic. For example, the participant's hometown could have some influences on their settlement plans upon graduation. If someone came from and returned to a smaller city, they might have more difficulties adapting to Canada. Upon graduation and settlement in their hometown, they would also find it hard to hunt for certain jobs and experience more severe cultural shock at home. Compared to moving to a Chinese metropolis, it seems easier for them to live in Canada because of their familiarity with the host communities. I believe this could be an interesting topic to discover in the future. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Sebastian. That was a very, very wonderful presentation. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Okay, I have a question, Sebastian, for you. What was the general reception of from the participants or people you spoke to about this project? How did they feel about you conducting this research?
I think there was one participant who didn't really have a clue of what my intention is. He's also my last participant, and he's very close to me. Before I conducting his research, all my participants were stranger to me. He was the only friend of mine, so I think it was kind of a complex situation for him. But for others participants, it was, I think most participants are very willing to share their experience about the university experience or their overall experience in Canada. Great.
Glad to hear that. You never know in conducting this type of research what the reception might be and how people might feel about it. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Elodie.
Okay, thank you so much. Just I will turn on my video, I think. I don't know why. Okay, anyway, it doesn't turn on. It's okay. So the topic is really interesting, especially my study field is also cosmopolitanism and global citizen education. So really related. In fact, I have two questions. So first, I'd like to understand better between the marginalization and the separation. In fact, the identity you distinguished between four categories. And I'd like to know exactly what is the difference between two. And also, if possible, I'd like to have some examples of the interview questions. How you could ask people to find such differences between identity, integration, separation, and marginalization. Yeah, that slide, yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Hi. For the first question, separation and marginalization. Separation is when people are only retaining their Chinese identity when they are living in Canada, so they refuse to accept the Canadian culture. And for marginalization, I actually have one participant who doesn't really accept the dominant ideology from either Chinese culture or the Canadian culture.
Okay.
So that's how I label them with the identity here. And could you please repeat your second question?
Yes, thank you. So now I understood better. That this means marginalization is like a third culture. It's like something is created between Chinese and Canadian, something third culture, you mean?
Yeah, so when I talk to them, I ask their kind of how do they agree to the dominant values of Chinese society and Canadian societies, and some of them would choose to only accept the Chinese dominant values, such as like you have to work hard, and you know, like in Canada, it's more like a work and life balance for most participants, and then in China, people don't really have their like concern for their life aspect. So this is only one of the examples, and I find most participants are either bringing their Canadian values to the Chinese surroundings, or they kind of have this kind of mixed culture. For the marginalization, I think it was more like I feel like she accepts some of the values from both cultures, but she's not really identifying herself as a particular Chinese or Canadian identity.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Okay, I understand better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Maria. I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about your own identity as Chinese Canadian student and how it influenced your research process.
I think I was trying to be more neutral when I was doing the interview, because I think I can understand both Chinese Canadians and Chinese international students. So I think it helps me to better communicate with them, because there are so many things that or social factors that you wouldn't understand if you're not coming from a kind of mixed background. And also, like, for example, if you're from a Canadian background and you're interviewing someone about their experience in experience in China, it's hard to imagine like what kind of reverse cultural shock they would experience when they return to China.
Great. Dr. Strangelove, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. A fascinating study, and I suspect a lot of people are going to be interested in this if you move forward with this, when you move forward with this. What did you find in terms of comparable studies? Because this, what you're looking at, must be of interest to many universities, many countries. Just a general question, what did you find in terms of what's going on out there in the research community closely related to what you're doing?
One of the research that kind of inspired me was in the UK, I believe, and their focus was more on the I think it was more on the cosmopolitan education and how mobility changed their aspects. And my research actually kind of disagreed with them because they were kind of believing on the how interculturality and how their awareness of other culture would inspire them to go to another country. But it appears in my study that that's not really a major factor, because people still, even if they have a more kind of critical thinking or more open to other cultures, they could still go back to China in order to like bring more opportunities to the Chinese market. So it depends not really on the cosmopolitan factors, actually. And I also find very rare, there are very rare cases of Chinese international student studies in specifically Canada. There's one about like the familial responsibility for Chinese international students in Canada, but that was the only recent one that I found.
Awesome, thank you. Press on. That sounds like you're headed down a very fascinating road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation, Sebastian, and for the questions, everyone. I believe we're going to try Natalie's presentation again, so we'll give that another try.